Yo, what's up guys? It's Brendan here from Addict Gaming. Yes, I've heard your guys' requests and cries for a DPS Guardian build, so here it is. It is a meditation DPS build that works in every aspect of the game with different variations between PvP and PvE. And I actually really sucked with the meditation DPS Guardian build for the longest time, but I did some research and read some people's opinions about it. And I've been getting a lot better. Our team has actually been winning a ton since I've been playing the Guardian build. Now the problem with the Meditation DPS Guardian build is that it really tends to get overlooked because when you look at a Guardian or you want a Guardian on your team, you usually want them to bunker and not DPS. But I will say that the Meditation DPS Guardian build that I've been using is super effective, and it's actually really fun because you get teleports and actually you use a lot of your defensive skills to boost your offense, which is actually tied into a problem with the DPS Guardian, is that especially when you're talking about meditations, we use meditations as a defensive and an offensive skill. So we're going to get healing and condition removal from our meditations, but we also need to use those for our offensive abilities and to put out more burst with our Guardian. For example, we can use our Whirling Wrath on our Greatsword and then use our Judge's Intervention pretty much at the same time, and we will teleport on top of a target, and we will be using Whirling Wrath on top of that target. Now we just burnt one of our meditations that would actually give us healing if we were using it in a more defensive situation. But we're using it as an offensive situation here, and we're going to get the Fury from our meditation traits as well. So that's one way you can burn a meditation for offensive abilities rather than defensive. And also when you use Smite Condition, you're using it more in an offensive way rather than a defensive way. At least you should be if you haven't been, because you can use Smite Condition to remove a condition, but you want to make sure that you're using it around people, because this is actually going to hit really hard if you are cleansing a condition off of you. You're going to hit people. I've hit somebody for 3,000 using Smite Condition trying to cleanse a condition off of me. So you can use it offensively or defensively, but you should definitely be using Smite Condition offensively more than defensively. Now, that's two meditations that we could burn already for more of an offensive use rather than a defensive use. So one of the problems you could run into with the DPS Guardian build is that you end up using your meditations for offensive purposes, and if you don't put enough damage into a target, or if you don't put enough pressure on them to get them to disengage from the fight, you've already burnt through a lot of your defensive abilities, making you very vulnerable to any damage that's going to come in. But the more you get to know how to play the meditation builds, there's actually a lot of sustainability here. And that's one of the things I struggled with when I first started playing a meditation Guardian build, is I was just dying, not right away, but I just felt like I didn't have the sustainability, especially in group fights. But once you get to know how to play it more, using your teleports to move around the battlefield and using your meditations properly, as well as your shelter and your immunes from renewed focus, and also using your virtues, you'll become a lot more effective with this build. Now, having said all that with the meditations, this build is actually one of the strongest 1v1 builds I've played in a while. I hardly ever lose a 1v1 in this build. I destroy Mesmers, I destroy Thieves, almost any power build. And the great thing is, because we have meditations and all that condition cleanse, you can also wreck condition classes as well. Now, the popular meta right now in PvP is power, but above that, where all the good players are, the top 100, top 200, they're actually playing condition. So you'll see that in Team PvP, if you're starting to rank up and play better players, all of a sudden the meta switches from power to condition, and this build handles both of them very well. You can deal with glass cannon builds because you have a lot of DPS and probably more defense than they do. And you can deal with extremely heavy condition classes like a Terramancer in PvP because you have so much condition removal. And one thing this build really excels at is being able to put pressure on one of their more important DPS players. Like, for example, I was playing a game earlier and this team was all revolved around their Terramancer Necro. And all I would do is I would teleport to the Necro and I would harass him, putting a lot of damage and pressure on him, and the team would just crumble because they didn't have all that condition damage on the point that they were trying to capture. And the Necro can't do anything about it because I have blocks and I have teleports to catch up to him. And I could put out a lot of damage, and if he wants to throw a lot of conditions on me, I could just cleanse all of them. So very powerful against glass cannons and conditioned damage builds. It's good against melee, it's good against ranged, and especially ranged because you can you have gap closers so they can't really stay away from you. And melee because we have things like our symbols and Whirling Wrath, and we have our burns and things like that. Okay, enough of me rambling. We are going to check out the stats and the gear. Now we're going to cover the PvP side of this build because that's the place that I use it the most. And then we're going to go look at the variation in PvE. For PvP, we have the Berserker's Amulet, Power, Precision, Vitality, and Ferocity. And for the runes, we have Rune of the Traveler. Now, there really is no other rune you can use. You could use Rune of the Speed if you want, but really, you cannot play this build without the movement speed. Mostly because there's absolutely no crowd control in this build. You don't have cripple, you don't have stunts or anything like that. So if you don't have that extra movement speed, what you'll find out is that you can't catch up to anybody. So you're just going to be running around the battlefield, just not catching up to anybody and not being able to hit anybody. So you need Rune of the Traveler. There's absolutely no other rune you can grab in this build. For the sigils on the Greatsword, we have Sigil of Fire and Sigil of Air. This will help with our initial burst. And then for our sword and our focus, we have Sigil of Fire and Sigil of Force. Now the way I like to look at it is that we're going to get a lot of burst from our Greatsword, and then we're going to switch from the Greatsword to Sword and Focus. And we're going to need to be able to maintain a high level of DPS, and the Sigil of Force is going to help with that. And then we can switch back to our Greatsword and get another big burst from that weapon set. Now for the traits in PvP, there are a few variations, but the one trait line that absolutely cannot change is the Valor trait line, and that has to do with our meditations and buffing up our meditation skills. We have Valorous Defense, gain Aegis when you are struck while below the threshold. And then we have Meditation Mastery, reduces recharge and meditations by 20%. Now we're bringing 3 meditations, and our Elite Renewed Focus is also considered a meditation. So this is very commonsensical to bring this one. Courageous Return, Virtue of Courage is recharged when you rally. Focused Mind, meditations grant Fury, so this is going to give us a lot of offensive potential on our meditations. Might of the Protector, gain might when you block attacks. Remember our Shelter our Shelter blocks attacks, and we also have a block in our Sword Focus weapon set. And then Monk's Focus, using a meditation skill heals you, and this adds to a lot of defense for our meditations. And if we didn't have this, then we would probably die very quickly in this build. Now I have 6 in Radiance. Justice is blind. When activating Virtue of Justice, nearby foes are blinded. One of the biggest uses of this trait is when you are stomping somebody and they're about to use their CC, their down skill CC, use your Virtue of Justice and you'll blind them and then they'll miss. Searing Flames, when you apply burning to a foe, remove a boon. Renewed Justice, Virtue of Justice is renewed when you kill a foe. This is more of a PvE trait. Powerful Blades, sword and spear damage is increased by 10%, and we are using a sword. Then Radiant Power, deal more damage to foes inflicted with conditions. That's 10%. You'll almost never be attacking somebody that doesn't have some sort of condition on them. So that's basically a 10% damage increase. And then Right Hand Strength, critical hit chance with one-handed weapons is increased by 15%. So our sword will have a 15% more crit chance. Now the variations are basically I have 1 in Honor and 1 in Virtues. The 1 in Honor is really good. You get Vigor when you deliver a critical hit. We'll be dealing critical hits all the time. This will give us more dodging for more damage mitigation. And then I chose Inspired Virtue. Your virtues now also apply the following boons. Justice, you get 3 stacks of might. Resolve, you get regen. And Courage, you get 6 seconds of protection. Now I like it because of the protection that helps us out. We also get the 3 stacks of might as well. The regen really isn't that big of a deal. Now the variations you can do is you could take the 1 out of Virtues if you don't really find the buffs that useful, because remember you are getting 6 seconds of protection, but that is on an 85 second cooldown, so that is a pretty long time. You could put 2 into Honor, and you can get something like larger symbols, or you can even, if you're feeling a little more dangerous, you want to put more damage out, you could actually take Vigorous Precision and Inspired Virtue out, and you could go 2 into Zeal, and you could get Fiery Wrath, which will increase your damage to a target by 10% if they're burning. which, you're applying burning all the time, so that's another 10% damage increase if you want more damage from this build. But this is the trade setup I have. There are a few variations. The PvE and World vs. World side will be a bit different. We'll actually be using a different weapon instead of the sword. We'll cover that later, but that's the gear and the traits for the PvP side of this build. Okay, let's go over the healing skill and the utilities, and we'll talk about our weapon skills a little bit. Then we will jump into the PvE side of this build. Now for our heal, we are using Shelter, block attacks while healing. We get a heal, remember, we do get a 2-second block, and we gain Might from one of our minor traits when we are blocking attacks. We have Judge's Intervention, teleport to your target and burn nearby foes, doing a little bit of damage. And of course, because of our meditation skills, or our meditation traits, we get some healing, and we get Fury from using meditations as well. It is also a stun breaker. We're going to use this a lot with our Greatsword. When we start using our Whirling Wrath, we are going to use our Whirling Wrath and teleport to the target right away using our Judge's Intervention, doing a huge burst on that target. Then we have Smite Condition, another meditation, and again healing and Fury when we use it. One of the great things about Smite Condition is it does AoE damage to targets around you, and if you have a condition on you and you use it, you actually do a lot of damage with this ability. So make sure that you have a condition on you when you use this ability, and it will really increase your burst damage. So for example, a nice little rotation is to be in your Greatsword, you use your Whirling Wrath, then you use your Judge's Intervention right away to teleport onto that target, hit him with the Judge's Intervention and the Whirling Wrath. Usually by then, you'll have some sort of condition on you, then you can pop your Smite Condition to do more burst. And then by that time, I usually switch to I'll put my symbol down and then switch to my sword and focus weapon set. Then we have Contemplation of Purity. Convert the conditions you are suffering from into boons. There's really no offensive aspect of this other than the fury we get from our traits. You're going to want to use this more defensively. Wait until you are getting bombed with conditions from an engineer or from a necromancer. Then you'll get the healing, and it is also a stun breaker, and it'll remove all conditions and turn those into boons for you. Then our last meditation is our elite skill, Renewed Focus. Focus, making yourself invulnerable and recharging your virtues. So that'll recharge our virtues of justice, resolve, and courage. And we'll get the healing and fury from that as well. Now, this also makes us immune to damage. It makes us invulnerable. So you could also time it to, if you're really getting focused on, you could also use your Renewed Focus to mitigate a lot of damage. And remember, if you're using this and you have some virtue that is off of cooldown, while you are using this, activate those virtues because they're going to get reset anyway, and then you'll be able to use them again a little later. Now for our weapon sets, we have the Greatsword, we have Strike, Vengeful Strike, and Wrathful Strike. That is our auto attack in the Greatsword, and our Wrathful Strike actually gives us Might when we finish our auto attack chain. Then we have Whirling Wrath. This is going to be one of our biggest damage abilities in the Greatsword. Spin in place, swing your Greatsword while hurling powerful projectiles. One thing you do have to remember while you use this is that if somebody has projectile reflection on, like an elementalist has the magnetic aura on, and a guardian has wall of reflection or anything like that, you are not going to want to use this because all of those little projectiles will bounce back to you and you'll end up killing yourself. Then we have Leap of Faith. Leap of Faith is amazing to get around the battlefield. It's a nice little movement ability. It's also a leap finisher, so we can get the new light aura if we put down our symbol of Wrath, which puts down a light field, and we leap through that light field, we're going to get a light aura, which gives us retaliation when somebody hits us, and then we will be applying vulnerability onto a target, increasing our damage that we are able to do to that target. And symbol of Wrath does a decent amount of damage as well, and it's really good to put onto a point because it's not going to cover the whole point, but you're going to usually make them get off the point a little bit, or they're going to have to maneuver around or just sit in your symbol if they want to. Then we have number 5, Binding Blade. This is a very good CC. It's really one of the only CCs we have in this build. Throw blades at your foes, causing damage over time. Bound foes can be pulled to you. The effect ends when a foe moves out of range. So this is great when you use your number 5, your Binding Blade, and then you could pull everybody near you. You could put your symbol down and use your Whirling Wrath and put out a lot of AoE damage on the point. Now for our Sword and Focus, we have Sword of Wrath, Sword Arc, and Sword Wave. That's our auto attack chain from our sword. And remember, we are getting the 15% critical chance from one of our traits. And the third attack in the auto chain, Sword Wave, send out a cone attack striking up to 3 foes. So it actually has, sword already cleaves, but the third ability on the auto attack chain is going to put out a little more AoE damage. Then we have Flashing Blade. This is going to be very useful when you need to teleport around. For example, like I said, in the Greatsword, you're going to use your Whirling Wrath, then you're going to use your Judge's Intervention to teleport on the target. Then you put down your symbol. That's going to be a lot of burst right there. You can switch to your Sword and Focus, and if they're running away, you can use your Flashing Blade to catch up to them and start auto-attacking them, or even use your number 3, your Zealot's Defense. Destroy ranged attacks while casting magical projectiles. So if a ranger is shooting you and you use this, then you will be destroying all the projectiles. And it does a lot of damage. And then we have number 4, Ray of Judgment. Pass the ray over foes and allies. Foes are damaged and blinded. Allies gain regeneration and cure 1 condition. So it's a nice little attack to send out. It bounces up to 4 times. And if it bounces to an ally, it will remove a condition and give them regen. If it bounces to an enemy, it will blind them. And then Shield of Wrath. Create a shield to block the next 3 attacks. If the shield is not destroyed, it explodes and damages nearby foes. This is one of our biggest defensive abilities. And we're going to want to use this. Usually the rotation for my weapons goes like this. I start casting my Whirling Wrath, then I use my Judge's Intervention right away. I teleport onto the target and using my Whirling Wrath do a lot of damage. I'll use my symbol as soon as it's done. And then I will end up using my number 5 on my Greatsword, my CC, pull them to me. I'll switch to my Sword and Focus, and then I'll throw on my Shield of Wrath. So I just did all of that damage to them and did a little bit of CC in a very short amount of time. So they're going to want to retaliate and attack me. I switch to my Sword and my Focus and put on my shield. Now all of a sudden they can't attack me. And after that I'll use my Zealot's Defense, and then if they're starting to run away, I'll use my Flashing Blade and catch up and kill them. So that's how my basic rotation goes in PvP. Anyway, those are the utilities and the weapon skills for PvP. Let's jump into the PvE side and cover the traits, and we have one different weapon set, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Okay, let's cover the PvE gear and stats, and if you hear the birds going crazy in the background, my apologies for that. For some reason, the birds all of a sudden decided to go a little bit crazy outside of my house. So, one thing I want to say before we cover this is, when it comes to World versus World, if you are roaming around in small groups and you're in small scale fights, I would stick with the PvP build. But if you're going to be in big Zergs and fighting Zerg versus Zerg, I would stick to the PvE build with a few exceptions, and we'll go through that as I'm talking about certain skills and things like that, because the PvE side takes more advantage on the Scepter, because the Scepter is going to be able to output a lot more damage, although the Sword and Focus weapon set is a lot more PvP friendly. Okay, so now that that's covered, let's talk about the stats and the sigils and things like that for the PvE side. Now we are going Berserkers again. If you want to mimic the Berserker amulet in PvP, if you want to imitate that in PvE, what you want to do is for your rings, accessories, back piece, and your amulet, you want to get full Berserkers. So that's power, precision, and ferocity. And then on your armor, also Berserkers on your weapons as well, power, precision, and ferocity. And on your armor, you want to go Valkyries, which is power, vitality, ferocity. So you'll get a little bit of vitality stuck in there. If you're okay with no vitality at all, then by all means don't get any Valkyrie, but you want to go full Berserkers, but you also want to put a little bit of defense in there. That's really up to your personal preference, how much defense you're going to put in there. You could even get a few pieces of Knights if you wanted to for more toughness. So again, we're going Berserkers in PvE, and for our runes, we don't need the movement speed for PvE, we just need more damage. So we're going Rune of Strength, that'll give us more power, more might duration, and we'll get the plus 5% damage while we're under the effects of might. For the sigils on the Greatsword, we have Sigil of Strength, 60% chance on crit to gain might, and then Sigil of Force to up our damage. And then on the Scepter Torch, which is the PvE weapon set I use other than, as opposed to the Sword and Focus weapon set, again, Sigil of Strength, chance on crit to gain might, and Sigil of Force as well. So the same sigils on both weapon sets. Now for the traits, we have 6 in Valor. The 6 in Valor are exactly the same as PvP. The Meditation Mastery, Focus Minds, and Monk's Focus. And then in Zeal, we are going to buff up our Scepter instead of our Sword. So Radiance is more of a Sword trait line, and Zeal is more of a Scepter trait line. So we have Zealot Speed, create a symbol of Wrath when you are struck while below the threshold. And then Fiery Wrath increases damage against burning foes by 10%. Symbolic Exposure, symbols apply vulnerability to foes. And then Scepter Power, Scepter damage is increased by 10%. So we're buffing up our Scepter. In Honor, we have 4 points. We have Vigorous Precision, gain vigor when you deliver a critical hit. Writ of Exaltation, symbols are larger. There's really not any good traits in the Adept tier of the Honor trait line for damage. So symbols being larger is pretty much the only way we can actually somewhat increase our damage in this build. Selfless Daring, the end of your dodge roll heals nearby allies. And Empowering Might, you and nearby allies gain might when you land a critical hit. So this, combined with the battles, the Sigils of Strength that we have, will help us gain might and stack might and increase our power even more. Now, if we look at our utilities and our heals, they're fairly the same, except I take Litany of Wrath, because when we use our heal, we don't really need the shelter, we don't need the block on that, and we're not going to gain might from that anymore. So what we're going to do is take Litany of Wrath, and that will give us the extra healing, and we're going to get Fury from it as well, and then it heals us based on a percentage of damage we do. Now, it doesn't heal for a lot compared to other healing skills, but with the meditation traits that we have in, and the amount of damage we're going to be able to do, we'll get a decent amount of healing out of it. And plus, with the other meditations we have, getting healing from that, we're going to have a decent amount of sustainability. We also have Judge's Intervention, same thing as PvP. You can teleport to your target and burn nearby foes, and that will give us Fury and healing as well. Smite Condition, because there's not much conditions in PvE, on the PvE side, I just bring Smite Condition so I can get more damage out of it. And I take out Contemplation of Purity, and I put in Bane Signet, which will give me improved power by 180. So without any might stacks, I'm sitting at like around 2,400 power. When we're stacking might, then that power is going to go through the roof. And then for our Elite Renewed Focus for the healing and the Fury, and then if we're in trouble and we need to reset our virtues, then we got Renewed Focus for that. Now for the new weapon set, again, the Greatsword is the same, but we're using Scepter Torch instead of Sword Focus. Because the combination of Orb of Wrath and Smite that's going to give us more DPS than the sword can put out. And then we also have Chains of Light, which will immobilize somebody and put vulnerability on them. And then Zealot's Flame and Zealot's Fire will give us a huge burst in our DPS. Set yourself alight periodically, burning up to 3 nearby foes. But then you could take that fire on you and you could throw it at your enemy, doing a decent chunk of damage. And then Cleansing Flame, breathe magical flames that damage foes and cure conditions on allies. Now the damage is really high, but it does take over 4 seconds to cast. So I would only do this if all of your other cooldowns, you're waiting for your other cooldowns. And then the Greatsword, the skills are the same. Okay, so let me talk to you about my rotation as far as it goes in PvP. I mentioned it a little bit before, but I just want to give you a few tips on playing the build. Remember, it might take you a little while to adjust to the build and learn all the ins and outs and the mechanics of it. So when I first start an encounter, what I'll usually do is I have my target selected, I'll find the one I want. I'll usually go for the glass cannons or the heavy condition bombing type of classes. I will start to use my Whirling Wrath on my Greatsword, and then as soon as I do, I'll use my Judge's Intervention at the same time, because it doesn't cancel my Whirling Wrath. So I can use Whirling Wrath, use my Judge's Intervention, and I'll hit him with both. And then I'll put my Symbol of Wrath down as soon as my Whirling Wrath is down. Now remember not to cancel your Whirling Wrath by putting your Symbol of Wrath down too early. I tend to do that sometimes, and you're going to lose a few thousand in damage if you end up doing that. And what you can do after you put down your Symbol of Wrath is you can use your Leap of Faith, because your Symbol of Wrath is a light field and your Leap of Faith is a leap finisher. You're going to get a light aura, which is a new aura they put into the game. And what that does is every time you hit an enemy, you apply vulnerability, and every time they hit you, they stack retaliation on you. So that's going to increase your damage by quite a bit. And then after that, if I have the opportunity, I will use my Binding Blade and then use my pull to CC them. And then I can switch to my sword and focus, and I'll usually use either Zealot's Defense or I'll use my Shield of Wrath. It depends. If I think they're going to attack me right away, I might as well put my Shield of Wrath on and then use my Zealot's Defense. So they get up and start attacking me, and then I'm going to block that attack while I'm hitting them with my Zealot's Defense. And then I'll use my Ray of Judgment. And if usually by this time they're extremely low, throughout all of this with your rotations of skills, you have to remember to use your Smite Condition. If they put a condition on you, use Smite Condition right away. That's going to add to your overall burst in this build. So usually that'll come even while I'm still in the Greatsword. I'll use my Whirling Wrath, then my Judge's Intervention. and then I'll put my symbol down. Maybe by then I have a condition on me. Then I'll use Smite Condition, and that's going to do a couple thousand damage. So adding to the overall burst in this build. Remember to use your Contemplation of Purity when you get condition bombed, and don't be afraid to use your Virtue of Resolve early for a heal. Also, you get the protection from Virtue of Courage, and then you can use your Virtue of Justice to apply a stronger burn. And use your Shelter and your Renewed Focus more opportunistically, if that's a word. Don't use it just because you need to heal. But if you see a huge amount of damage coming in, just use your Shelter right away to block that damage. You're going to gain might from it in PvP, and you're going to get the heal from it. And then if you're getting focused, you could use your Renewed Focus to become invulnerable to all these people attacking you, and it's going to reset your virtues, and you're going to use those virtues to heal yourself and put out more damage. And remember, if you're using your Renewed Focus and your virtues are available, use your virtues. And then your Renewed Focus will proc, and then your virtues will come off of cooldown again, and then you can use them again. So there's no reason to use your Renewed Focus while you have virtues that you can use. You don't use them, and then your Renewed Focus comes off, and then you just wasted 2 virtues, or a few virtues, depending on how many were available to you. So anyway, those are the tips for this Guardian Meditation DPS build. I hope you guys liked the video. It actually went on for a little longer than these videos usually do. But if you have any comments or questions, make sure you leave them below and I'll try to get back to you. If you enjoyed this video, please like, favorite, and subscribe, and share. Tell your friends about Addict Gaming, what we're doing over here. We really appreciate that. I'll see you next time, guys. I encourage you guys to do the same thing. That's what I like to do as well. So, this build takes advantage of the Axe Shield and the Longbow weapon sets, which is, before you might think that was actually an unusual weapon set combo. Usually the Axe's Shield is paired up with a Greatsword. Sometimes people will even bring a hammer, but you never really saw it with Longbow so much before. Now there are quite a few reasons why you should bring Longbow over the Greatsword.